Let's see if I can draw a map with the cheapest markers ever. So I was perusing the Target art supply aisles when I found this pad of graph paper for $3 and this pack of 20 markers for $3.50. They also had these insanely cheap colored pencils and crayons, but I'm saving those for another video. So I'm going to use these markers to draw a map, see how good I can make it look with kind of the most accessible and cheapest markers I could find. I'm also going to skip on any fancy drawings. I'm going to keep it real simple, so even if you don't have any drawing ability whatsoever, you'll still be able to make a map like I'm making in this video. So before I jump into the actual drawing, I'm going to start with a key. I'm just picking a few of these marker colors to represent the different terrain types. So I got grass, mountains, forest, rivers and ocean, sand and desert, swamp, and then we'll do some cities and towns and dungeons. Now, if you're drawing a fantasy map, I think maybe the most important thing is to have a good range of greens and oranges and yellows, and maybe a few good blue colors as well. Okay, now I'm jumping into the actual map. I've cut the holes off the paper, and I realized that this grid paper has two different sides, so I'm going with the 1/4-inch grid. And I have no plan going into this map drawing. I don't have a particular world in mind. I'm really just filling in the spaces with the colors that correspond to the different terrain. I started with the mountains because those are going to be like 4 tiles, like a 1/2-inch square. And then the rivers flow from the mountains into the ocean, but I'm going to save filling in the ocean for last. I got desert and forest tiles. It's just fun building up this map kind of brick by brick. You can take it slow, 1 square at a time, or fill in larger areas if you're confident about how much space a forest is going to take up or whatever. And I actually think this would be a super fun way to build a map while you're playing. Like if you just had a little sheet of grid paper and a few different marker colors, and you're playing in a fantasy game, you're exploring a fantasy world, and as you go, you kind of fill in the map. You know, like, oh, we've traveled a day to the north, and we've left the mountains and gone into the forest. Or off in the distance to the east, we see a river, so we can fill in a couple of those squares in with blue marker. I don't know, just seems like a fun thing to do at the table. Now, as I'm drawing this map, I'm becoming very aware of the limitations of these tools. So this grid paper is very thin, and these cheap markers are pretty streaky. You know, I'm trying to mitigate it by keeping the lines parallel and not coloring over one spot too much. But the streaks are hard to avoid, especially in the big filled in areas like the ocean. As I'm wrapping up the coloring of the map, I wish I would have colored in the ocean horizontally instead of vertically. I think going side to side with the streaky marker would have made it look more like waves than the up and down, but you live and you learn. Now, I could call it here. This map actually has all of the information I would need as far as where towns and cities are located versus forests and rivers and mountains. But I think I can make the map look way cooler by adding just a little bit of line art. So I also got a few packs of pens while I was at the store, and I'm going to skip using the microns and use these more common pens. I love these Papermate Flare pens for sketching, and I really like using the Pilot G2 pens for writing and taking notes. So let's see how these work over top of this marker drawing. Now I'm testing it out first so I don't ruin my big map. On a separate sheet of paper, I'm just drawing these icons over top of the color. And like I said, I'm going to keep it really simple. I'm going to represent grass by just drawing these 3 simple little dashes. Mountains are just an upside down V with the sort of zigzag squiggle. And I'm also making sure the mountains take up 4 squares instead of just 1, because I want them to be a little bit bigger and more imposing on the map. And reversely, I'm drawing 2 trees per square for the forests. They're just little circles with a stick coming out for the trunk, or a triangle with a stick. Either way works. For the water, I'm just drawing the classic squiggly waves. Desert sand is just represented by a couple little dots. Nothing fancy there. And swamps are represented by this horizontal line with a little squished in W on top. For towns and cities, you could totally just draw a little circle for a town and a star for a city. But I'm going to get just a tiny bit more complicated and draw a little house house for a town, and this very simple castle to represent the city. Now, if you need more help figuring out how to draw icons for fantasy maps, or you're interested in drawing a map that's a little bit more complicated, I've created a guidebook all about drawing fantasy maps. It's called Flick Silverpen's Guide to Making Maps. It's available in my online shop. If you're watching right when this video comes out, I've sent a reprint to the printer, so it's kind of on back order, but you can still order it and I'll ship it out as soon as the books come in. I'm really proud of this guide. You don't have to have any drawing experience, and if you just follow the steps in this book, you can make really, really cool fantasy world maps. Okay, before I start adding all of these icons onto this map, I've decided that it needs an outline. So I'm kind of tracing around the edge where the land meets the water with the bold line. I'm using the Papermate flare pen. And this step is really just for clarity. I'm actually even going back over it and making the line even thicker, like kind of 2 pen strokes wide. And having this border really makes it much more clear where the delineation between land and water is, and helps make the map much easier to look at. Now it's time to start filling in this map with some actual drawing. I'm starting with the mountains, and because I already figured out how to draw each of the icons on the separate sheet of paper, it's really easy just to go block by block, especially because each space is already filled in with the color that represents the terrain. I can just really easily plop these icons down. I've decided that the grass and the desert and the swamp icons will sort of be staggered, kind of like a checkerboard in the grid, so I'm leaving every other space empty. I don't want the map to get too crowded, and this kind of contrasts the forest tiles where there's 2 trees per square, so it looks more dense. So like grasslands look more open and forests look more dense. And I think this is just the really fun part of the process, where the map comes alive. It can take a little bit of time, but I just think it's so worth it. And the cool thing about drawing maps like this is that you don't have to be an expert artist. You can totally draw these simple icons, and you can even use the cheapest of tools to make something look really cool. Now, I don't have a name for this blocky fantasy world, so let me know if you have a suggestion down in the comments. If you'd like to support the channel, check out my Patreon, where I release monthly tabletop role-playing game adventures and guidebooks like the Making Maps book, and sometimes even games. Like this month, I'm making a tabletop role-playing game inspired by the Ninja Turtles. Anyway, hope you think this map made with cheap markers looks cool. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!